Hey everyone, I'm on a mission to hit 1,000 subscribers, and I'd love your help to get there. If you're enjoying the content, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now and join the family. Something snapped inside the Cleveland locker room. Something you can't measure on a stat sheet or fix with a team meeting. For weeks, quiet tension had been building, hidden behind forced smiles and media-trained answers. But today, it finally exploded. One practice, one series of plays, and suddenly the entire team made a decision their coaches never approved. They didn't hold a vote, they didn't need to. In that moment, Cleveland's players chose their quarterback, and it wasn't the one wearing the starters label. It wasn't the one the coaches trusted. It was the one they believed in. What happened next wasn't just a quarterback switch. It was a full-scale rebellion. A silent uprising that exposed everything wrong inside this franchise. Because when a team stops listening to its coach and starts following one of its own, that's not strategy anymore. That's mutiny. It didn't start with shouting or sideline arguments. It started with glances, quick, frustrated looks between receivers after another misfire, a lineman shaking his head, a running back jogging back to the huddle a little slower each time. Small cracks that everyone saw, but nobody dared mention out loud. Dillon Gabriel was supposed to be the steady hand, the safe choice, the guy the coaching staff could trust to execute their system. But behind the scenes, the truth was spreading like wildfire. The locker room had already lost faith. The offense wasn't just struggling, it was disconnected. Every missed throw, every stalled drive, every emotionless team meeting pushed players further away from Gabriel and closer to one name that kept echoing in the halls, Shedeur Sanders. Whispers turned into conversations. Conversations turned into eye contact during film sessions, where frustration hung thicker than the projector's light. The coaches tried to brush it off as early season adjustment, but players knew better. You can't fake belief. You can't coach chemistry. And when the trust between a quarterback and his team cracks, it doesn't take long before the whole structure collapses. The tension wasn't explosive yet, but you could feel it, humming under the surface like a storm building just beyond the horizon. And when it finally hit, nobody was ready for how fast everything would fall apart. It was supposed to be just another routine practice, the kind that coaches run to fine-tune timing before the real games begin. The sun was high, the field quiet except for the rhythm of snap counts and the squeak of cleats on turf, but something about that day felt heavier. You could sense it in the body language. Players moved slower, their eyes distant. When Dillon Gabriel took the first rep with the starters, the energy on the field flatlined. Receivers jogged half-speed routes. Linemen barely fired off the snap. It was like everyone had silently agreed to make a statement without saying a word. Then came the throw that broke the silence. A simple out route, routine, mechanical, but the ball sailed high, slipping through the air like a bad omen. No one even tried to adjust. The receiver just let it go. A few seconds later, another overthrow, this time into the end zone bleachers. And that's when it happened. A quiet mutter from the defensive line, loud enough for everyone to hear. Here we go again. No shouting, no chaos, just the sound of collective frustration, the kind that doesn't go away. Coach Stefanski clapped his hands, trying to keep the illusion alive. Next rep, he shouted, but his voice felt hollow, bouncing off players who weren't listening anymore. For the first time, it wasn't just a bad throw. It was a moment of realization. The team didn't believe in their starter. They weren't rebelling with words or defiance. They were rebelling with silence. And then, almost on cue, the shift began. The murmurs stopped. The energy snapped back to life. Every helmet turned toward the sideline as one figure stepped onto the field. Helmet strapped, gloves tight, eyes burning like he knew exactly what was about to happen. Shedeur Sanders. He didn't have to say a word. His presence alone flipped the entire mood. Players straightened up, receivers locked in. Even the air felt different, sharper, charged. The next snap was like flipping a switch.
Smooth drop back, perfect read, laser throw right over the middle. The receiver made a toe tap grab on the sideline, and suddenly, the silence broke into chaos. Cheers, laughter, the kind of noise that only comes from belief. That single play didn't just move the chains, it moved the locker room. You could feel the shift. Gabriel stood frozen, helmet in hand, watching as the same teammates who had ignored the last rep now sprinted toward Sanders, shouting, "That's QB1," over and over. It wasn't about stats or schemes or depth charts anymore. It was about something deeper, respect. And in that moment, right there on the practice field, Cleveland's players made their choice. The moment Shedeur stepped into the huddle, you could feel the tension evaporate, not because of what he said, but because of how he carried himself. Calm, controlled, unshaken. The kind of confidence that doesn't need a speech or a pep talk. It radiates. He looked each teammate in the eye before calling the play, and suddenly everyone snapped to attention. The receiver stood taller, the linemen dug in. It wasn't forced, it was instinctive. They believed, and belief, once it spreads, is unstoppable. The first snap was electric. Shedeur's drop back was effortless, fluid, no hesitation, no wasted motion. The defense shifted, but he saw it instantly. He planted his feet and fired, a missile over the middle, threading through a window barely the size of a helmet. The receiver barely needed to move, just extended his hands and let it stick. A perfect sideline grab, 2 feet in. The sideline erupted. Helmet slapped. Players yelled, "That's our guy!" And for the first time in weeks, the offense looked alive.
But Shedeur didn't celebrate. He didn't even crack a smile. He just nodded, walked back to the huddle, and called the next play. That calm, that composure, it was magnetic. You could see it spreading through the roster like wildfire. Veterans who had kept quiet through all the controversy were suddenly shouting his name. Young players who had followed orders blindly now ran routes like their careers depended on it. Then came the throw that sealed everything. Deep post, one-on-one coverage. The ball left his hand like it was guided. Perfect arc, perfect timing. It dropped right into the receiver's stride for an effortless touchdown. No hesitation, no doubt. The entire offense sprinted toward the end zone, jumping, screaming, swarming him in celebration. Not because of the score, but because they knew they had just witnessed their real leader take the field. Meanwhile, on the sideline, Dillon Gabriel stood alone. Helmet dangling from his fingers, eyes fixed on the field as his teammates celebrated without him. Not one glance in his direction, not one word of encouragement. He wasn't benched, he was erased. In a matter of minutes, the locker room hierarchy flipped completely. And through all the noise, all the celebration, Shedeur stayed silent. No taunting, no ego. He simply tightened his chin strap and jogged back to the sideline, eyes forward, ready for the next rep. That's when everyone realized this wasn't just a hot practice or lucky streak. This was leadership, authentic, undeniable, uncoached leadership. The coaches hadn't said a word, but the players already knew. The team had a new QB1. They didn't need permission. They'd already made the choice. When practice ended that afternoon, the real drama was only beginning. The tension that had been simmering on the field followed everyone straight into the locker room, and for the first time it wasn't hidden behind polite silence or team slogans. You could feel the division the second the door closed. On one side of the room, laughter echoed. Music played. Players gathered around Shedeur Sanders' locker, replaying his throws on their phones, cheering, hyping each other up like they had just won a championship. On the other side, Dillon Gabriel sat quietly, helmet by his feet, staring at the floor. The sound of celebration just a few steps away might as well have been a mile. Nobody said anything directly, but body language told the whole story. Shedeur didn't seek the spotlight. He didn't have to. The spotlight found him. teammates gravitated toward him like planets pulled into orbit, drawn to the calm confidence he carried. One by one, players approached him, nodding, dapping him up, saying things like, "That's what leadership looks like," or simply, "You're the guy now." It wasn't loud or chaotic, it was natural, organic, real. Meanwhile, Gabriel's side of the room was a void. Players who once laughed at his jokes or chatted about film sessions now avoided eye contact. He tried to smile, tried to join a conversation, but every word died halfway out his mouth. You could see the panic setting in, the realization that the room he once led didn't belong to him anymore. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked slightly, the edge of frustration breaking through. "Y'all acting like he's the savior or something." The response came fast. A receiver turned around, eyes locked, tone flat but sharp. "He is." The room froze. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, like an unspoken agreement, everyone looked away from Gabriel, their silence louder than any argument. Another player finally said what everyone was thinking. "We want to win. Shedeur gives us that chance." Gabriel scanned the room, looking for someone, anyone to back him up, but no one did. Not a single voice, not a single nod. The players who had followed him just weeks ago now stared at the floor, unwilling to meet his eyes. It wasn't just preference anymore. It was exile, a silent vote that stripped him of every ounce of authority he had left. He picked up his phone, pretending to scroll, the universal move to avoid the unbearable, and sat alone, trying to disappear into the digital noise while the real world moved on without him. And yet, in all that chaos, Shedeur stayed quiet. He didn't boast, he didn't gloat, he simply sat there, taping his wrists, head down, locked in. When one of the veterans leaned in and whispered, "We're riding with you now," Shedeur only nodded and said softly, "I'll let my play speak." That's when it became official, not through a press release or a coach's announcement, but through silence, respect, and body language. The locker room had decided. The players had chosen their leader. The team had a new QB1. And everyone knew there was no going back. When head coach Kevin Stefanski walked into the locker room that evening, he had no idea that the team he thought he controlled was already gone. The air was thick, not with celebration, but with certainty. The kind of certainty that doesn't need permission. Players stood around Shedeur, still buzzing from practice, their energy alive and uncontainable. Stefanski tried to cut through it with his usual calm tone, clipboard in hand, voice steady. "We support both quarterbacks equally." But the words landed with a thud. Nobody responded. Nobody nodded. Then from somewhere near the back of the room, a voice muttered just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Yeah, one of them." Laughter erupted, low at first, then louder, raw, unfiltered. It was the kind of laughter that burns through authority, that exposes the cracks no coach can fix. Stefanski froze for a half second, long enough for everyone to notice. He forced a smile, tried to regain control, but the damage was irreversible.
In that moment, his position as head coach felt less like leadership and more like a formality. He clapped his hands, trying to redirect the room. "All right, good work today, fellas. Let's keep the focus." But no one was listening. They weren't being disrespectful. They were just done. Done pretending. Done playing along. Behind closed doors, Stefanski knew what had happened. He saw it on the field, felt it in the locker room. His authority wasn't challenged. It was replaced. Shedeur Sanders hadn't just won over the team, he had redefined the team's identity. Players who used to look to Stefanski for direction were now taking cues from Shedeur's body language. When he spoke, they listened. When he stayed silent, they waited. The balance of power had shifted, and not in secret. By the time Stefanski met with his assistants later that night, frustration had already taken over. Reports claim he slammed his notebook shut, pacing the room, muttering about player mutiny and disrespect. But deep down, he knew this wasn't about defiance. It was about connection, something he couldn't coach, couldn't fake, and couldn't control. The next morning, he doubled down. Gabriel was still listed as QB1 on the depth chart. Stefanski wanted to send a message that he made the decisions, not the players. But the message backfired instantly. During warm-ups, the same apathy returned. Routes ran half speed. The offense looked lifeless again, like a body without a heartbeat. And just a few feet away, Shedeur stood with his helmet off, watching. Calm, composed, and very aware. He didn't need to say anything. His presence was the loudest statement on the field. Stefanski's challenge wasn't about X's and O's anymore. It was about control, and he'd already lost it. Every rep Gabriel took felt forced. Every play called through the headset sounded hollow. And every time Stefanski tried to rally the team, their eyes drifted somewhere else, to the man they had already chosen to follow. In the span of 24 hours, the power dynamics of an entire NFL franchise had flipped. The head coach was now the outsider. The locker room wasn't fractured, it was united, just not behind him. The next 48 hours inside the Browns facility felt less like football preparation and more like political warfare. Meetings ran late, doors stayed closed, and behind every whispered conversation, there was one question echoing through the halls. Who's really in charge here? Reports claim that a group of veteran players, including captains and longtime starters, requested a private meeting with Coach Stefanski. What was supposed to be a calm discussion turned into a quiet confrontation. One of them, according to multiple sources, spoke first. His voice was calm, but the message hit like a punch. "Coach, you're killing us. We can't win with Dillon." Another chimed in. "The team's made its choice. You're just ignoring it." Stefanski sat in silence for several seconds before responding, but everyone could tell. He was rattled. For a coach known for control and composure, this was unfamiliar territory. His roster wasn't divided into factions anymore. It had unified, just not behind him. Every word out of the players' mouths carried a weight that numbers and playbooks couldn't counter. They weren't lobbying for a friend. They were demanding a leader they believed in. And here's where the situation grew dangerously complicated. Sources close to the organization say ownership had quietly been in Shedeur's corner from the beginning. It was the owner's influence that pushed for his draft selection, even when Stefanski hesitated. So when players began aligning behind Shedeur, it didn't just challenge the coach, it validated ownership's decision. That power shift was devastating for Stefanski's credibility. Suddenly, the Browns weren't one team anymore. They were three factions locked in an invisible tug-of-war. Ownership wanted their investment on the field. The coaching staff wanted to protect their authority. And the players? They just wanted to win, and they believed Shedeur was the only way to do it. One assistant coach, speaking off-record, described the atmosphere perfectly. "It's chaos, man. Nobody knows who to listen to. Everyone's walking on eggshells." Behind closed doors, Stefanski's meetings grew shorter, his tone sharper. He started isolating himself, sticking to his staff while players whispered in corners. Analysts who saw the practice footage described a team split between energy and emptiness. Vibrant when Shedeur led, flat when Gabriel returned. It wasn't subtle anymore. It was visible. By midweek, the story started leaking to the media. "Player mutiny," one headline read. "Locker room turns on QB1," another claimed. But what no one outside the building understood was that this wasn't just about a quarterback competition. It was about identity, control, and survival. When a locker room chooses its leader, that choice doesn't go away. It spreads, it hardens, it defines everything. And inside Cleveland, that decision had already been made. The players had taken the franchise into their own hands, and every move from the front office to the coaching staff was now a desperate attempt to catch up. Because this wasn't a quarterback controversy anymore. It was a revolution. And it was happening behind closed doors. By the end of the week, the truth could no longer be contained. The walls that once separated the locker room from the media had cracked wide open, and the story spilled into every sports headline across the country. Cleveland in crisis, locker room revolt, Shedeur takes over, unofficially. It didn't matter what the team's depth chart still said. Everyone already knew the reality. Inside the building, the name on paper meant nothing. The players had spoken.
Dillon Gabriel walked through those same locker room doors every morning, but it was like walking through a ghost town. No one spoke to him. No one made eye contact. He'd sit in the same spot, scrolling through his phone, earbuds in, pretending the silence didn't exist. But silence has weight, and it was crushing him. For a player once seen as the future, this wasn't just a demotion, it was an exile. His confidence shattered, his reputation bleeding out through every viral clip and insider report. Even the simplest moments, a missed throw in practice, a sideline glance, were now dissected online as evidence of a fallen man. Meanwhile, Shador Sanders never said a word about the controversy. He didn't have to. His play did all the talking. Each practice rep felt like a highlight reel. Quick reads, perfect timing, effortless chemistry. Teammates fed off his energy. Coaches, even though still loyal to Stefanski, couldn't ignore the obvious. The team moved differently when Shedeur was under center. He didn't demand leadership, he attracted it. And yet, for Kevin Stefanski, this wasn't just a quarterback issue, it was an identity crisis. The head coach of an NFL team had become a spectator in his own organization. He faced an impossible choice: double down on authority and risk losing the locker room forever, or surrender control and admit the players and ownership had taken over. Either path led straight toward disaster. Insiders whispered that Stefanski had begun privately questioning his future, unsure whether he'd even make it through the season. Behind the scenes, the front office began preparing contingency plans. Trade calls for Gabriel quietly circulated, media staff scrambled to control the narrative, framing it as competition instead of collapse. But everyone inside the building knew this wasn't a battle for a starting job. It was a shift in power. And once a team decides who its true leader is, no depth chart, no press release, no coach's decision can reverse it. Now, as the regular season looms, the Browns stand at a crossroads. Every rival team sees the fractures, senses the weakness, and is ready to exploit it. Cleveland's season hasn't even started, and already it feels like the most pivotal one in franchise history. Because this isn't about touchdowns anymore, it's about control. Dillon Gabriel, once the chosen starter, now faces a question that could define the rest of his career. How do you rebuild when your own teammates have stopped believing in you? Can he recover from the public humiliation, or will this moment follow him wherever he goes next? And for Shedeur Sanders, the weight of the crown comes early. He's earned the team's faith, but in doing so, he's inherited their chaos. Every throw, every drive, every huddle from here on out will carry the pressure of a franchise split down the middle. The Browns have made their choice, not with words, but with loyalty. The players have their leader, the coach has his dilemma, the organization has its reckoning. The only question left is the one nobody wants to ask out loud.